Hi guys, Coach Fenz here from FTP Training. We're very lucky today to be joined by Dylan Cooper from Ride Technics, who's going to explain negotiating technical terrain both up and down here at Stromlo Forest Park in Canberra. So welcome, thanks very much for joining us, Dylan. Explain to us some of the, some of the main technical issues of descending and climbing on technical terrain.
Well, the main thing I see is people just trying to avoid obstacles. So rather than take the straightest, most efficient line, people are seeing obstacles like rocks, lumps, roots and things, and they'll just weave around them and try and just avoid them. And that creates a lot of, especially upper body movement, but just weaving of the bikes, a lot of steering, moving around and just more than they need to.
Right, so negotiating terrain properly is not necessarily always about just taking what is effectively the line that most people have ridden. Because again, on this bit of terrain there's that big wide line that sort of arcs all the way around on the climb, which is where most people ride. And again, reefing on the bars and moving around. You'll be looking for a more direct line. How then do you sort of get over that sort of more direct line when it's actually somehow a little bit more technical?
Well, it's down to thinking laterally and thinking differently. So you're right, the most worn line that everyone's taking is the default one, and people see the worn line and think that's the track, and they just focus on that and follow it. So you just got to think a bit differently and say, rather than that worn clear line, what's the straightest line? Other than the quickest path through that section normally, it's often the quickest, provided you focus on the up-down movements and actually absorb things properly, pump and unweigh at the right times, then it's always going to be, well, it's usually the quickest.
Fantastic. Again, you talked about getting the weight placement right, sort of just compressing into areas, making sure that you're unweighted when you're going over those loose, slightly off-cambered sections of the course. Again, it's something that most people don't get right. They'll be weighting or braking at all the wrong times, which is why the wheels spin out or slip out on those more technical, sort of straight and more direct lines. Yeah,
that's right. I think people just don't work on those fundamentals first. So once you get your unweighing and weight shifts, doing those well, you'll start seeing how smooth you can be. Even though there's an obstacle, you should be able to ride over it like it's not there. Once you do that, it opens up the door to do that straight line, go over a route instead of going around it, and you're still just as smooth. And the main thing I see is once you start doing that, it minimizes the pauses that you're pedaling for. So if you steer around an object, you've got to sort of hesitate with the pedaling for a bit, straighten back up, then pedal again. Whereas if you just go over something, you can actually pedal just hard while you unweigh and not have that pause.
So one other thing there is, of course, that then leads us to another classic mistake in this sort of terrain, which is focusing just down at your front wheel. So again, I think that's often why people ride like that to start with, is they just follow the line of where they're going instead of projecting up and looking down the trail. So again, is that something you'd consider definitely doing some sort of a fundamental thing for going both down and up the track?
That's a big one, yeah. Scanning up the trail and planning ahead. So if you plan ahead, you can look at obstacles and actually go, how can I use those? Instead of going, freak out and slow down, and that makes you ride over it rough anyway. Instead, plan ahead, go, there's a rock face, I can use that as a ramp, maybe get some air off it, unweigh over what follows. So you might clear the rest of the rocks because you've used that ramp. So you're actually using the obstacle, and that's down to that planning ahead and looking ahead all the time.
Fantastic. What about gearing on sort of climbs like that? Again, what we often see with the sort of more novice rider or beginner rider is they tend to get a bit over geared and they're grinding, so they're getting out the saddle and they're sort of really manhandling their way up, which again leads them to sort of going round the longer, flatter route. So would you, really consider just keeping a relatively high cadence and keeping quite smooth through that sort of terrain?
Yeah, that's a tough one because I see two extremes. One is the grinding you're talking about, and that's often a symptom of the weaving. So they go, here's a section, I'm in a nice cadence on entry, but then they start weaving and braking and slowing down and hitting things. So that slows them down, therefore they're then overgeared. Whereas if they straight lined that section in the same gear, they would have actually flowed through it and they would have been spinning. So it actually flows a lot better. The other extreme is people who spin going into it, going, okay, I want a nice cadence, I'm not going to get bogged down and grind, but they'll start weaving or straight lining, but they're spinning too much, so the up-down movement isn't smooth because it's sort of, as they're pedaling to high cadence, they're bumping things and being jerked around. There's too much movement there. So too easy gear is just as bad, I think, because you're not smooth. There's no platform to pedal off, and you don't get the accelerations over lumps and things like that. So long story short is I think there's a good balance there. But if anything, I'd set the incentive to overgear and then use your technique to execute well, and then you'll get over that and keep on top of that gear and actually be faster overall.
Yeah, fantastic. I suppose that then really comes to this again, looking up the trail and anticipating. Because again, one thing that we know from the elite riders is how good they are at carrying momentum into sections. And by being in that slightly bigger gear, you're carrying that momentum, but then anticipating what the terrain's doing, just clicking down a couple of gears so that then you're able to continue and keep that momentum flowing through those technical sections.
That's right, and that's where the entry speed comes in. Being confident, setting the right gear, looking ahead, does it kick up? Does it flatten out? Does it get rougher? Is there good traction? All those factors come in, and that's where, yeah, entry speed into it and just keeping it going and not hesitating and letting that speed drop so you are on top of that gear.
Superb. Thanks very much for the insight, and it will really help people ride these technical sections better. Thanks very much, Dylan.
Thanks, Fenz.
Thanks, guys. We'll catch you out on the trail. Bye-bye.